I don't care if you've been playing fantasy football for 25 years or if this is your first year diving into the game. It should be a universal truth accepted by all, debated by none, that the things that we're chasing for fantasy football, the types of players, the potential ranges of outcomes, the teams, the situations, the bets that we want to make are directly related to, impacted by what's happening in the real NFL. It should be common sense to understand that the trends, the patterns, the deployments, the usage, the concepts, the copycat league that is the NFL, it drives the thing that we're chasing for fantasy football: points, opportunity, utilization. However, for a very long time, that information, those patterns, those schemes, that hasn't been available to us in the fantasy space. But y'all, things are changing, and that information is becoming more public. And you've got sharp people that are taking that type of information and really analyzing the things that are important, the types of things that we need in order to score us fantasy points. And the wide receiver position, folks, is one of those things that after the top guys that everybody knows, there's just a lot of shit getting thrown at the wall, and we're hoping that it sticks. But I am excited to dive into this real topic of the NFL and the fantasy space with one of the sharpest real football to fantasy football minds that I believe I've had a chance to talk to. We came into the fantasy game around the same time, 2018, 2019. He is Mr. Context Matters himself, Dwain McFarland from Fantasy Life. Y'all, I didn't bring just anybody on. Dwain knows his stuff. He is the lead fantasy analyst and director of analytics at Fantasy Life. Best known for his utilization report. Phenomenal report. Usage, scheme, deployment. He also has created a wide receiver supermodel to help you identify collegiate prospects, and Lord knows everybody needs help with that. Dwain has spent time at PFF, and he's got a very unique voice in this space because it is data-driven, yet he does not ignore the game and the things that are happening on the field, the trends, the coaches, the deployment, which routes and which usage and schemes actually matter. Y'all gonna enjoy this one. This is a good conversation, and one that Dwain and I could have probably kept on for about another 2 hours, talking about the actual game and how that is impacting us today in fantasy football and how that may look down the line. So if you stick around to the end of the video and you find the information actionable, and I know you'll always find it entertaining, y'all know what to do. Hit that thumbs up button, like the content, subscribe to the channel, but most importantly, comment below. Let us know what you think about this topic. Let's talk ball. Okay, let's get it. Bitch, let's get it. Appreciate you giving me some of your time today to talk about something that I'm really passionate about, man. And I followed your content for a long time. We came into the fantasy game around the same time, Dwain, and you are very much in tune with what the NFL is doing and how the things that are happening in the real NFL game are translating to fantasy football. So as we start this conversation out, I just want to hear your general thoughts of what you've seen, what you've noticed from the NFL, the fantasy game, maybe the disconnect between the two, or some of the things that you have noticed that really pair and marry fantasy football with the real NFL game.
Man, I think, number one, thanks for having me on. And yeah, we did kind of come up together. So I think we've done one show together before. I think Ian and I had you on back in the day, probably a couple of years ago. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, like talking about the way that fantasy football comes together or doesn't, right? Really with the real NFL. I think there's a lot more really similarities between the things that we're looking for, because ultimately, like, what does the NFL want? They want a wide receiver that can go get open, get targets, get yards, score touchdowns. That's why you draft a wide receiver like Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors high in the draft, right? You're looking for a playmaker. Well, we're looking for the same thing, as fantasy players. We're looking for people that can score PPR or have PPR points. It's really the same things. I think it's honestly kind of funny whenever the two sides kind of go back and forth. Oh, well, you're just a fantasy person, or you're just, you're not a fantasy person. You're an NFL person. Really, we're all after the same thing, guys. We can all get along and we can all learn from one another. I really enjoy both sides of the conversation. I do listen a lot to the, people like Brett Coleman, true, what I would call NFL truthers, where they're looking at scheme. They're looking at all these things. Matt Waldman, I pay attention to for scouting. Matt Harmon, everybody knows Matt Harmon. Like if you look at what the reception perception is, that's driven off of him watching film. So I think there's a happy way that all that stuff marries together. I'm more of a data minded, side of it, but I definitely am watching film. I'm watching all the games. I'm trying to keep up with all the current trends. At the end of the day, like I'm doing this because I just love football, period.
Right.
Fantasy happened to be the outlet that helped me continue on loving football, So I love how they all come together. And I think there's just room for all of it. I will say this. I think ultimately talent is still the top driver, like no matter what. Like, is a wide receiver good or is a wide receiver not good? Now, I think your offensive coordinator and your quarterback can help unlock either more or could, actually limit you, right? And
Correct.
Take away from what you can do. So I think there are ways that talent gets magnified, and there are ways, if you will, that talent gets lessened, and some coordinators don't get the most out of what's going on with their talent profiles, and honestly, even just using them in the best ways, okay? But I think you also have to look at like a complete team. Like, okay, do they have all the different components you need to truly make a defense sweat every inch of the field? You know what I mean? Some offenses are built more horizontal, some are built more vertical. The ones that are the best can do it all.
And you touched on something very key and very important. You said that you came up through this space and through this game from a data-driven approach. However, you're watching the games. You love the game of football, so you're able to pick up and notice different things that maybe sometimes the numbers don't tell the full story or the film does it. And what I want to ask you, it's funny in life, Dwain. You've got children. I've got kids as well. Yours are a little older than mine. But you remember there was a point in time in life where baggy clothes were the thing. Big jeans, Jinko jeans, big baggy jeans, big oversized shirts. And you remember the era, Dwain, where you would wear button-up shirts that go under the suit to the club. You're wearing button-up tees and polos with the collars up, all that stuff. You get to the skinny jean era. And now we're here in 2024, and you look around and we're back to wearing big saggy pants. If you got on skinny jeans, that's not the cool thing. You just see this cycle in culture, in life, and you notice the same type of things in fantasy football. When we started in this space, it was pick players. I watch film. I'm the film guy. I can pick players better than you. And it was age-adjusted metrics. If you're not an early declare, if you didn't get on the field by your freshman or sophomore year, we don't want you at the wide receiver position. You're too old to play running back. And then you look at today's game, and you're seeing 5'7", 5'8", 150, 160-pound wide receivers thrive. You're seeing running backs that don't profile like traditional bell cows being deployed and scoring fantasy points. You're not seeing the same type of offensive linemen or linebackers. The game is changing a little bit, Dwain, in how we analyze and evaluate. And I think some of the best learning lessons come through failures. I truly believe that there's this gentleman named Ryan Leak, and if you've got some time, I highly encourage you or anybody out there to watch. It's about a 10, 15-minute video of this pastor out here where I live in Rockwall, Texas, named Ryan Leak, and it's called Chasing Failure. And he's a guy that played like rec ball at 24 Hour Fitness, but was a pretty good hooper and thought that he could play in the NBA. Like, I'm good enough to hang with these guys. So at the time, the coach of the Phoenix Suns brought him out to a practice and let him work out with the NBA team. And the reality sunk into him that, holy shit, this is a whole different ball game that we're playing now. Chasing failure and learning through those experiences. And Dwain, when you're watching the game, or when I watch the game, college football on Saturdays, I see these wide receivers that are out yakking the entire defense. They're catching 2-yard hitch routes or screen plays, and they're just shifty enough to do all this stuff. Tavon Austin, we've seen them before. And then you realize that once they get to the next level, it's a whole different ball game. The things that worked in college, some of them translate, but a lot of them don't, because the NFL game has changed, Dwain. And I read this article, and I want to start off by asking you a couple of these questions, right? Very interesting article, and I'm going to link it in the description. But the title of this article is called Why is NFL scoring on the decline? And this dropped May 22nd, 2024. He referenced a couple of different things in this article of why NFL scoring is on the decline. And it starts off by this, Dwain. NFL scoring peaked in 2020 and has fallen each year since. Drives are stalling, and it may have to do with defenses executing in the right coverages. So I want to get into this conversation about wide receiver, but we have to keep the NFL team at the forefront of this conversation. I want that to be the foundation of how we talk about these wideouts. So we're in an era where we've got some of the best wide receivers it feels like we've seen come into the NFL with these elite quarterbacks, accurate, creative offensive coordinators. But then I sit back, Dwain, and people don't know what the hell to do. If it's not Amon-Ra St. Brown or CeeDee Lamb or the obvious cast of characters, you're looking around and these situations are cluttered. There are 2, 3, 4, 5 different wide receiver options across these teams. And some of them, like you just said earlier at the start of this conversation, quarterback situation may make you a little more hesitant to go all in on those situations. But when you're thinking about the NFL in today's game and the wide receivers that we have, the quarterbacks that we have, the offenses that we have, and then you see that scoring is continuously on the decline, it really highlights the fact that there's another side of the ball, right? Dwain, there's another 11 players that get paid a lot of money to stop the guys that we need us to score fantasy points. So just starting the conversation off there, Dwain, let me ask you about your approach to the wide receiver position as a whole in fantasy, because it's real easy to identify running back, man. Where's the guy that's going to get the opportunity? I want volume. I want the pass catching work. Tight end, no one really knows what the hell to do, and quarterback, people just kind of stay away from. But wide receiver, there's a lot of talk about a bubble, too many. Just your overall thoughts about the position as it currently stands in fantasy football today.
Yeah, well, a couple things. First off, like talking about the other side of the ball, the big change has definitely been the way that defenses are handling coverage. And I do think this is where analytics plays a role in the game. The analytic nerds started telling the teams that, hey, guys, let's not give up the big plays. Let's make the teams drive. Now, to your point, everything is in vogue, then out of vogue, then comes back in vogue again. Well, guess what? I'm old enough to remember this style of coverage back in the day, even whenever we first started hearing about the Tampa 2, but the whole bend, don't break defense. These defenses were like, hey, we'll let anything happen between the 20s. But once we get inside the 20s, we're going to lock you down. So Correct. It's not necessarily anything new. There are wrinkles, there are innovations. There's a willingness to stay in deeper coverages more often and not let other teams, even though they may come out in these heavy personnel sets or they're going to run the ball, to still not commit to stopping it. Just saying, fine, we'll still let you do that too. But most likely you're going to get a holding call on this drive. And suddenly you're going to have 2nd and 17. Guess what? You're not running. Then we know you're passing and we have your ass. Right. Yep. So I think there's a willingness to stick to these deep coverages in more scenarios. The idea has always been there, but the new wrinkle on it is, okay, we don't care if you're running the ball well. We're going to stay in this deep coverage and still just dare you to run it and not get a penalty. So I think that's a change whenever you want to talk about the wide receivers themselves and then the impact, the ripple effect, right, of that is we also have the rules changing. I'll come back to that in a second. But the impact of that is, well, you have to attack defenses in a different way. So that means the old baggy jeans might have been the 6. Sorry, Des, you're not old or anything, but I'm you and I both live in Dallas, so I'm gonna use Des Bryant, chunk up the X, right? The old prototype of wide receivers, and not that this prototype's dead, but everyone used to think you had to have a 6'3", 215, 50-50 contested ball guy. You don't have to now. In fact, if you have all of those, that's going to be a problem in so much zone coverage where by the time the ball gets there on anything past 10 yards, there's probably 2 dudes on you. Okay, so even if you're good at contested catches, it's getting harder and harder. The way to win in today's game is to use the space they're giving you sideline to sideline if they're going to try to take away the space that you used to get over the top. And I think that is where you're seeing some of these smaller wide receivers start to have a little bit more success. These yak specialists from college, if they land in the right scheme, they can be more productive here in the NFL. But I think the other part is the rules. Some of these dudes, Tutu Atwell, bro, you're not playing 30 years ago. Like, it ain't
Right.
happening. Even if a coach wanted to give you the chance and said, man, in practice with no pads, which didn't exist back in the day, but this dude's amazing. Well, it wouldn't have mattered once you tried to put him on the field because he was going to get completely mugged. So the NFL, being in the entertainment business, every rule change is for the offense. Let's face it. I mean, very rarely does the defense get a rule change.
I agree.
Yeah, I feel for those guys, man.
Talk about it.
I feel for them. Yeah, so whenever you add all those things up, like, the game is geared to the offense. And honestly, the quarterbacks we've got more quality quarterbacks now because these guys are just raised playing the game their whole life. Every second of their life is playing football, you know? So I think you just put all those things together and the league has evolved. But I will say, like, we've seen this trend before. There's just a new wrinkle on what's going on with the trend. But like, how it creates my approach or how it changes my approach for wide receivers, I still don't think it's that different, because the number one thing to truly unlock guys for fantasy is, let's face it, guys, you don't want a lot of wide receiver 4s or 3s in fantasy land on your team. They're not winning you championships. Like, it's fine. At least they weren't a complete bust, that you could start them occasionally. But what wins you your league are your wide receiver 1s, and then those mid-range to high-end wide receiver 2s. Outside of that, like, you know, it's not great to have these guys on your squad. And I still think to be in that range, you've got to be able to do it all. You need to be able to win deep. You need to be able to win intermediate. You need to be able to win underneath. Now, there are occasions where those things aren't exactly that way, and it goes back to some of the other things we talked about, like scheme. I will say this, like, I definitely... You know, talent is also the most sticky thing year over year, right, like for these wide receivers. I'm a data guy. What's funny is we can also just keep it simple. You know what the number one predictive stat of next year's fantasy points per game are? Last year's fantasy points per game, right? It doesn't answer everything, and I know we like to go deeper, but sometimes I have to remind myself of those things. So really all you're looking for is, okay, this guy last year scored 22 points per game, but he scored 17 touchdowns. You're really looking for something that, okay, he's probably not doing that again. So you kind of got to regress that back down. But really the next most important thing, the data continues to show it every year, Ray, and you know this, it's, can you earn targets? Yep. Like, can you go out there? And here's the thing. You don't always have to be open to earn a target. Your quarterback just has to trust you. If your quarterback trusts you, some quarterbacks trust you whether you're covered or not. So again, that's where the quarterback play comes in. Are you an accurate quarterback? Okay, well, that helps a wide receiver. I mean, go look at Garrett Wilson. Dude earns targets with the best of them, but when you're catching from Zach Wilson, man, your yards per route run, another talent metric we look at, it ain't going to be good, right? It's funny, I see some of these tweets, well, Garrett Wilson, he gets a lot of targets, man, but this yards per route run, I'm like, God, dude, he played with Zach Wilson. You not think that yards are impacted by the quarterback that throws it behind you every time or gets you obliterated? Sorry, I'll stop for a second. You go.
Don't stop, because you are touching on something that I have theorized about for quite some time, and there's no way for me to quantify this, but I know it's true. Like, no two yards run on a slant route they're equal. They're not created equally. No. Jamar Chase running a 5-yard slant, catching it from Joe Burrow, is a lot different than Garrett Wilson's 5-yard slant from Zach Wilson. It is.
It's night and day.
It's Dwain. Weren't you? And I vividly remember, context matters. That was your. There, it does matter. There is context, and let's get into it now, because you talked about the scheme, the talent, the ability to earn those targets. When the entire fantasy space is playing the same way, where everybody, let's just hypothetically, everybody understands the importance of the elite difference-making players on your roster, the Jamar Chases, the CD, we don't have to talk about those.
Yep.
I think the blind spot in fantasy, especially at wide receiver, is everybody after that initial cluster. I'm not talking about the guys way down the ADP list. No, I'm not talking about Bub Means and trying to decipher Darius Slayton. I'm talking about that range of Devontae Smiths, your Nico Collins, your Tank Dells, your JSNs, that big cluster of like wide receiver 15 to 30 to 40. A lot of people don't know what to do. And when you get inside that range, the number one tendency to say is, well, Jaden Reed will never become one of these elite guys, so screw him. Don't want him.
Yeah, you shouldn't do that. Yeah.
Right. JSN is never going to be. Most people will just say they don't have the chance to become one of those elite guys, therefore they don't matter. Here's where I believe NFL offenses and systems and schemes are factoring in and playing a role in how some of these fantasy points are earned. And you look across the NFL landscape, there are patterns, Dwain. There are trends of things that NFL teams have historically done with the wide receiver position that yields more fantasy points than others. Go route, hitch route, out route. Some of those type of concepts, when deployed and targeted, those are the things that have historically, over the last 5-6 years, scored more points for the wide receiver. Now, you talked about the QB, and I think that is truly, Dwain, where we start this wide receiver combination, because I don't care how good you are. If your quarterback is not able to get you the ball, sure, you're going to earn those targets from that guy, but it's going to be a Garrett Wilson level of outcome where that player didn't do anything for you. You may have gotten a spike.
Quality of target is a real thing.
It's a real thing. So when you're looking at a situation where you have a Garrett Wilson of last year who's catching passes from a Zach Wilson, or you've got, and let's just say we knew that Bobby Slowick was probably a good offensive coordinator and he'd have 3 different wide receivers that were pretty good in Houston. Like, how do you pick between a crowded wide receiver room with an efficient quarterback and a great offensive scheme versus the guy who's going to be peppered with 140 targets, but the quality is going to be shit? Like, how do you start to tell people you want this over that?
Yeah, so you caught me at a great time. So I'm working on my wide receiver tiers article right now, and this is something I spend a lot of time thinking about. But I apply the same process, whether we're talking about, CeeDee Lamb, the top guys you're talking about, or whether we're talking about those guys in the middle, and what type of opportunity do we really think that they have to become the next version, right, of the next CeeDee Lamb? Where's he coming from? That's really what we want. When you can find the next CeeDee Lamb in round 3 or 4 of your fantasy draft, and you hit on that, you're going to have a really good chance of winning your league. Those are the difference makers. But I use the same approach across everything. Number one is talent. Okay. Do you earn fantasy points per game the last year, but there's always context there. Garrett Wilson, 12.8 points per game. AJ Brown, 17.3. Do I really think there's that big of a difference between those two players? No, I think the biggest difference was AJ Brown had a functional quarterback and Garrett Wilson didn't. And what tells me that is Garrett Wilson had a 30% target share last year. So did AJ Brown. If you went and earned the target, you're probably good. You're probably a good player. Now, what you do afterwards with the ball, there's talent there too. Some players are better after the catch than others. And to your point, some players can run go routes. They can run slants. They can work in the screen game. They can run out routes. Some can only do one or the other. And so you want guys that have a diverse profile. But like overall, I'm looking for, number one, are you talented? And the things I use, and I know you have the Trinity, but I use points per game the last year, target share, yards per route run, and your air yard share. Those 4 things together are what ultimately drive the talent profile. And then once I've done that, then, okay, say I got a lot of guys that are similar in talent. Well, then I'm looking at, what about their quarterback? Yes. How good is their quarterback? And how many yards do I have these teams projected for passing per game? Okay. I spent a lot of time working on that. So if I think they're in a really good pass offense, they're really talented, we're off to a great freaking start. Well, there's 2 more components. The third component is looking at what's their target competition like.
Yeah.
I could argue to you, Garrett Wilson is in a great spot this year, maybe even better than AJ Brown, right? Because I think they're going to be similar passing offenses, assuming Aaron Rodgers is healthy.
Right.
But Garrett Wilson doesn't have to worry about Devonta Smith. Garrett Wilson doesn't have a Dallas Goedert on his team.
He does not.
So literally, he could be someone that could have a 33%, 34% target share, and now catching them from hopefully still a quality quarterback. That you could say that's a little bit of a question, which might push Garrett Wilson down a little bit in your fantasy ranks. But at that point, I don't care about his 12.8 fantasy points per game last year anymore. Now I'm like, okay, this guy is the quarterback. He's checking all the other boxes I want. So Garrett Wilson right now, for me, for example, he's in the same tier as AJ Brown and Justin Jefferson for me this year. Because once you put the whole puzzle together and I stack all those things up, he is equal. The last thing is age. Okay. Yeah. So if you're between ages 24 and 27, you're in your prime. And the way I figure out prime is I always go back and compare the best 3-year stretch of all these historical wide receivers. What was their best 3-year stretch? And it's usually ages 24 to 27. So if you're in that range, I'm not really worried about you falling off. I'm going to assume that like you can still ball. Once you get a little bit past that, you get to ages 28 and 29, there's usually about a 15% drop off in ability. But I'm not going to flip out. Like when I look at Tyreek Hill and I'm like, he was still badass last year. I'm not going to suddenly think Tyreek Hill's falling off the cliff. But in a coin flip situation, I'm going to take CeeDee Lamb over him because CeeDee Lamb's still squarely in his prime. There's a little more chance Tyreek falls off than CD, right? And then there's the guys that get to age 31 plus, and that's where the real risk factors, you start turning into coin flips at that point, okay? You might have been a wide receiver 1 last year, but there's a 50% chance you're going to be a wide receiver 4 this year, and I might not be able to tell always which one it's going to be. So I put all those categories together, and I use that process all the way down. But where it does become the most important is to your point. The market's pretty good on figuring out who the guys should be at the top. Where it does get trickier is once you get to those middle guys, and you talked about it. It's I don't know, it's kind of this mushy spot where people have trouble drawing clear lines, and sometimes for good reasons. I use tiers, and when I give you a tier of 4 guys, that means okay, now you put on your thinking cap. These guys have when we calibrate everything, they should be in a group together. Right. If you like one of them more than the other, then go with it. You go with it. Say you watch film on all 4 of them and you like these 2 dudes better, well, then go with them. But the point being is, based on my research, they've all got pretty equal odds. But when I create tiers and I truly do my tier article, the thing I do is, because what you said, I don't give you a tier with 15 dudes in it. My tiers are 3 to 4 players. They are tight. And it's all based on these criteria. So that's my process, but I will tell you, and I know you want to talk about this too, the other component, and it's built into that passing yards per game, the quarterback, but the other thing is the scheme. I will tell you right now, there are coordinators in the league that I bet if you asked a man on the street, a person on the street, is Zach Taylor a good offensive coordinator? A lot of people are going to tell you, yeah, because they're going to think, what's the Bengals, man? They got Jamar Chase. They got T. Higgins. They got Joe Burrow. Well, that wasn't the question. The question is Zach Taylor a good offensive coordinator? And I would argue he's terrible. And my number one definition for an offensive coordinator is this. Look, people will tell you that know football, and you know football, there's really not a lot of new route concepts under the sun. There are certain route combinations designed to put different defensive coverages in a bind where the quarterback sees it, and based on that coverage, he's going to one of the 2 guys. He knows. Yes, you got high-low reads. There's all these different types of reads, but they're based off of a combination of routes. Back in the day with the Saints, Drew Brees would drop back. He had Darren Sproles running a Texas route, an angle route. Underneath, he had Jimmy Graham running the seam route right at the safety. Safety split, Jimmy Graham. Safety stays in the middle over the top of Jimmy Graham. You're in cover 3. Mismatch against who? Darren Sproles. Oh. So that's the kind of thing that's happening. There's not a lot of things that are new in that area, but the coordinators that are dialing up things to make their quarterback better pre-snap or right at the snap of the ball, I think are one of the best ways to really think about who the top guys are. Because when we look at some of the trends that are going on right now in the NFL, motion is a big one. Right. And Mike McDaniel really brought this in. Kyle Shanahan's done it, but not just a motion. Back in the day, we had motion and you'd see a shift and you'd hear the commentator be like, oh, he's seeing if he's in man or zone. Yeah, he was. Well, your shift isn't just to see man or zone. That's one component. That the other part should be giving your offensive player an advantage right at the snap. Well, what did Mike McDaniel do? He said, okay, well, we're going to take that, but now I'm going to take that jet motion that used to just be for sweeps and for the jet sweep to wide receivers, and I'm just going to let them cross the formation at full speed and then snap it while they're still at full speed and a DB standing still. That's an advantage that a DB just can't overcome, especially against freaking Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle. You are cooked, son. Like, you're done. The only way to defend it is to stay further off the line. Well, then you do that. Well, Tua's like, okay, we got nickel on this play. They're all standing 5 yards off the line of scrimmage. We're going to run the ball.
Barbecue chicken, baby. Barbecue chicken.
So motion, plays with motion over the last 3 years. Did you know a route with motion is worth 55% more fantasy points per route than non-motion? Zach Taylor, do you use motion? No. What do you do?
Say that again. Say that.
55% fantasy points per game boost per route. Fantasy points, sorry, per route, not per game. So fantasy points per route run. A motion route is worth 55% more than a non-motion route. Okay? You should be dialing that up every time you can as a coordinator until the league figures it out and says, no, go find some other gene code jeans. We're sending you're going to have to figure out how to go back to skinny jeans because now we're taking away the baggy jeans. Play action. 26% more per route than non-play action. That's a cheat code, man. So when you look at Mike McDaniel, what does he do? Oh, he's in the top of the league in both of those things. And what else does he do? He comes out with a freaking fullback on the field too. Now, don't get me wrong. He has Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle.
Yes.
You can't just do this with any two Joe Schmoes, but it's still an advantage. Whether it's Jalen Waddle or Malachi Corley or whatever name you want to throw out there, it's going to be better for them if you're helping them with these cheat code buttons. The other thing you're doing is you're giving your quarterback an advantage right at the snap of the ball or right after the snap of the ball that may be freezing a defensive player. The other thing you get is trick play looks, and all that is, PFF defines that as an oddity that a defense wouldn't be used to seeing. Anything that makes them have to think half a beat longer, that creates more space for your players. Zach Taylor doesn't do any of these things. The only thing that's winning for Zach Taylor is he has freaking Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Hey, let's get Jamar Chase in motion. That dude is a yak freaking monster, dude. He would have a yards per route run similar to Tyreek Hill if you used him that same way. He would have a chance to go for 2,000 yards if you use him that same way. But no, you're still calling an offense from 15 years ago, man.
Right.
And you're wasting Joe Burrow. Now, I will say this. Quarterbacks have a hand in this. If there's certain things they don't like, then they're going to take it out of the playbook. Derek Carr's a great example. Clint Kubiak going to New Orleans. Man, I hope that that's a big thing for Chris Olave, and I hope that helps out Rashid Shaheed. But Derek Carr is one of the few quarterbacks that's worse on play action, has been for his whole career, and I don't think he likes turning his back to the defense. So quarterbacks, they can nerf scheme ideas from coordinators. So I don't want to put it all on the coordinators, but I would think something like motion. You come to Joe Burrow, Joe, look at this Miami offense. I'm pretty sure he's going to say, let's go, like bring it to
Let's do it. Like it's so interesting that you talk about that because intuitively, I'm studying the Rams and I'm just watching the Rams.
McVay's amazing. That's a great one to watch. The blocking concepts that they deploy using motion with their wide receivers, running 3 wide receiver sets 95% of the time, that is something that I hope if y'all missed that, go rewind that, listen to that, clip it, because Dwain, that is something that, again, as we move forward in this game, and my question to you is if all of these things we have this information now, you and I have this information, we can look at this. Why has it been so difficult for the fantasy space to get our hands on stuff like this? Because as you're talking through these situations and scenarios, you know what I'm doing? I'm thinking about, and I'm just using Underdog, for example, the ADP list of the quarterbacks, and I'm thinking about where Derek Carr is relative to other players. I'm thinking about the scheme change, and if I wanted to tell myself this story that it's going to be better for Carr, like these micro edges, this level of information, Dwain, is so helpful because a lot of people, and I want everybody out there to understand that neither Dwain nor we're not talking to you like you don't understand football. I'm assuming that most people that watch stuff like this are very sharp, that have been watching the game for quite some time, but the information's not out there. Like that stuff is very hard to find at times, Dwain. So what is your plan to disseminate and create content that talks about the game, these coordinators, the scheme, the deployment, the usage? It's bigger than just, I like that guy, I think he's good. Yeah. No, there are repeatable patterns that are happening that are branching off of coaching trees that you can see happening throughout the NFL season. And I guarantee you, if we watch this year, you will be able to pinpoint the offensive situations that are just like, you could probably tell exactly what's going on.
You look at the Panthers last year, and there were a litany of issues. But the fact that they ran 11 personnel, second most in the NFL, they didn't run the ball out of it. You're just sitting Bryce Young up to fail. He sat back there. They knew he was going to throw the ball. They wouldn't run. There were a litany of problems. There was no creativity. You look at Arthur Smith in Atlanta. A lot of people wonder what happened to Atlanta. They deployed the highest percentage of different personnel groupings in the NFL. Why on earth, with Desmond Ridder, a struggling Kyle Pitts, are you trying to run 15, 16 different groupings? There was no consistency, no cohesiveness.
What's funny, Arthur Smith I think he's actually sharp as far as like being a play sequencer and play caller. Where he struggles is just with the obvious shit.
Yes.
It's like, hey man, keep Kyle Pitts and Drake London and Bijan Robinson on the field.
On the field.
I will guarantee you the defensive coordinator is applauding you silently in his head every time you take those guys off the field to run Kadarrell Hodge. No offense, Kadarrell Hodge. You're a freaking NFL player. I'm not. Okay. Like, you're a baller on a level I can still never understand. I'm just saying the opposing DC would prefer Kadarrell Hodge be on the field than Drake London.
Yes.
So just some silly rotation stuff with Arthur Smith.
Can I ask you about draft capital for a second? Because that is...
Can we talk real quick about these coordinators? Do you want to hit just a few quick highlight things for people?
Hell yeah.
We can rapid fire them, but then let's come back to draft capital.
Let's go.
All right. So the Eagles, they now bring over Kellen Moore. What's the first thing you hear when you say anything about Kellen Moore? 3 years ago, he was the hot thing.
Oh, yeah.
Now you say Kellen Moore's name on Twitter. People are like, can we be done with Kellen Moore, man?
Ew,
dude just sucks.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Last year, what did Kellen Moore really have outside of Keenan Allen? They had to shut him down at the end of the year. He had Justin Herbert. He had a good quarterback. All the weapons got hurt. But I'm just going to tell you right now, Kellen Moore is willing to dial up all of these cheat codes, and I think they actually are perfect for what the Eagles need. Last year, what did the Eagles not do? They were a stagnant offense. The only thing they had in the passing game was really their RPO, which worked great the year before. But what do defenses do? They adapt to you. Even if you got really good players, you're going to eventually run into a few defenses that can still stop two really good wide receivers if they know what you're doing every play. Okay. And so that offense became stagnant last season. Well, what Kellen Moore is going to do, this guy loves motion as much as anybody in the NFL. So now imagine A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, not just having to go line up outside exactly where the defense knows they're going to be every play. You put A.J. Brown in more motion like Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is fourth in the league in motion plays, on receiving plays over the last 2 years at 20%. 1 out of 5 plays, Tyreek Hill's ass is in motion, running full damn speed, and he's already too fast to cover. Do that with A.J. Brown. Well, that's what they did last year with Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen, I mean, at 32 years old, now he's a good player, but he's coming out here with a damn 33% target share. That takes some work. Keenan can probably get to 27 on his own, but Kellen Moore gave him the icing on the cake to help make him an elite player. And if you had Keenan Allen before the injury, man, you were sitting on a gold mine. You're talking about a guy you were drafted in round 6 that was performing like a top 3 wide receiver. Well, now we're going to get that for A.J. Brown. You're going to get it for Devonta Smith. The other thing you're going to get is probably an increase in passing play percentage. I don't think it'll go bonkers like it was with the Chargers, but you're probably going to get more passing plays. Okay. And the other thing you're going to see more of is even more play action. This guy loves to hit all the cheat codes that we love, and he's got 3 really good receivers. And the other thing people will be, oh, well, Jalen Hurts, man, it's going to be the worst quarterback. I'm like, you guys are so damn negative. Jalen Hurts is the worst quarterback that Kellen Moore's had. Well, he's had Dak Prescott, who's underrated, and Justin Herbert, who's also underrated. So fine, even if that's true, I don't think Jalen Hurts is a bad quarterback. No. I think he's still a good quarterback, and if you put him in this scheme, man, I'm telling you, sorry, Cowboys fans, I'm a Cowboy fan.
Me too.
The Eagles could go bonkers. I'm telling you right now. Jalen Hurts this year, I don't think you could have said this about him before, but I think he has a ceiling to throw for 4,500 yards and still give you 10 rushing touchdowns. I'm telling you right now, A.J. Brown is one of the best wide receivers in the league, and he's going to be in the best scheme he's ever seen in his life. And I love Devonta, but A.J.'s an alpha. A.J. Brown, he's a damn alpha beast. You know, we're talking like whatever period you want to go back and look at in the earth. You know, he's freaking T-Rex. Like, what you want to go to Jurassic period? He's T-Rex. Like, he's the alpha of every period. You want to go to the sea? This dude's the freaking orca that kills great whites. Like, he's a beast, man. He's as good as he's as good as Justin Jefferson. He's as good as Tyreek Hill. He's as good as all those guys. He's going to be in the best scheme he's ever been in his life. So it won't surprise me at all if A.J. Brown is the number one guy this year. We briefly hit on the Saints, so I won't spend too much time there. But if they can get Derek Carr bought in to the play action stuff, that's going to be good. I'm telling you guys, Chris Olave is a baller. Chris Olave, what happens is people get tired of this. They're like, well, I've already heard he's a talented guy, but it just isn't happening for him. Well, it wasn't a very creative offense last year, and Derek Carr was hurt a lot. Derek Carr was dealing with massive shoulder injury problems for, I don't know, almost half the season, if you go back and look at it. And then he had head injuries. He had all sorts of stuff. I'm not saying Derek Carr is a world beater, guys, but in a good scheme, I still think that Derek Carr can be a middle-of-the-road quarterback. He's not at the age where you would think he would just be done, right? Absolutely. And middle of the road, in a good scheme, you put those things together with some good players around you, it can be good. Chris Olave has a really good chance to be a wide receiver 1 this year. The Falcons.
I was going to ask you about
Atlanta. Maybe I'll let you take this one.
No,
you love the Rams.
Atlanta. No, talk about, because these coaches that come off of trees that we're not sure how they're going to operate, the only thing I can do is look at where he came from and what they did. That I don't know what else to do with Zach Robinson.
Moves.
Yeah, yes.
Zach Robinson comes from a scheme that runs 11 personnel. What do? They go sign Darnell Mooney. You may not like him, but they invested in wide receiver.
Yeah.
And what do? They trade for Rondell Moore. They let Jonnu Smith go. They're probably running 11 personnel most of the time. They go get Kirk Cousins, a pocket passer like who? Jared Goff. Okay, Jared Goff, I know, was there before Zach Robinson, but we're talking about this scheme. You're looking at a point guard style quarterback. This is John Stockton, man. He's not going to come out and score points like Jordan, but he can deal. He can come out and distribute whenever you put a good scheme around him with good weapons. Well, we already talked about Kyle Pitts, man. Drake London, his talent profile right now says he's a borderline wide receiver 1. We don't know for sure yet, but he's either a high-end wide receiver 2 or he's on his way to becoming an elite wide receiver 1. And so now you're going to talk about an offense that went from being one of the most run-heavy to being probably one of the most pass-heavy. You're going to get a quarterback upgrade from Desmond Ridder, Marcus Mariota, Taylor Heineke. As much as we may hate on Arthur Smith, the biggest problem with the Falcons over the last 2 years have been what? It's quarterback play.
Yep.
And Drake London coming out here and posting +2 yards per route run with that quarterback group, you should have your eyes wide open, guys. Context is everything. He's probably a 2.5 yards per route run plus guy with a good quarterback. And now you're going to put him in offense, going to throw the ball more, going to use motion, play action. McVay loves play action. Zach Robinson, he's already come out and told you guys, we're feeding Bijan. We're freaking feeding Bijan. So now you got to deal with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, who can work a seam like nobody. People don't even understand how good Kyle Pitts is yet. And I know you're tired of it because you've heard he's good and he's screwed you in fantasy. So I get it. Like we all have heartstrings, and I hate letting anybody down with this stuff. I tell people, look, I'm not going to be right all the time. I'm going to follow this process the best that I can and give you the best advice I can. I'm going to always be transparent about my process. Doesn't mean we're not going to have misses. But one thing I can tell you, Kyle Pitts is talented. I have no doubt about it. And he was playing injured last year too. So you can't forget that. He's not going to deal with this rotation crap again. He's not going to be playing 60% of the routes. So when you talk about the Falcons, the sky is the limit as long as Kirk Cousins is healthy. And the beauty is, what if Kirk Cousins does get hurt? Well, at least your backdrop is now better than anything you've had in the last 3 years. You got Michael Penix.
100%. 100%.
So, man, that's one. I'm trying to think, what are some other ones?
Can I give you a nasty one? What do you think about Waldron?
I'm
Shane,
talking about.
What do you think about Waldron? What do you think about what's going to, because this again, it's easy to identify CeeDee Lamb. Okay, he's popping his neck. If you're not watching on the stream, he's getting loose. He's about to unload on this one. The Bears, there's 3 receivers there, Dwain, and they're all 3 pretty damn good. They've got a competent tight end. They've got multiple running backs. You've got a rookie quarterback and a new offensive coordinator. What the hell are we? Where do you start? Where do you personally, not where Ray starts, where do you start when you look at everything is new in Chicago? 2 new receivers, new OC, new running back, where do you start, Dwain?
The optimism is these are all talented players. I think Caleb Williams is really good. I don't know where you stand on him. I'm not. I didn't
love him.
I don't put him in the category of like the best ever, but I put him as a really good quarterback prospect.
Yes.
And I think people get fatigue on stuff like that. And towards the end of this quarterback process, people started dogpiling Caleb for all the wrong reasons, in my opinion. Okay. I think Caleb's a baller. Keenan Allen getting up there in age, but we just talked about him, a 33% target share. He could fall off this year, but he also could just be badass again. He's a baller. DJ Moore had his best year of his career ever last year. I mean, this dude after the catch, go back and watch some of those games. Watch that game against Washington and just go watch DJ Moore. I mean, it's just an absolute pleasure. I could just watch that game over and over. That dude's out there just literally, I feel like I can't hear the audio, but he's telling the opposing corner every time, I'm just about to freaking just torch you, bro. Like it's not going to be good. You don't want your family to watch this. You should probably call in sick for the film day next week because your coach is going to roast you just like I'm about to do. So you got DJ Moore. And then you had Rome Odunze. He just happened to be in a class where you got Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison, poor dude. But like in the last 5 years, in many of these classes, he would have been the best wide receiver. So that's all the positives. The negative is what you hit on. Shane Waldron. Oh my God. Dude. What the quickest way for me to be out on you as a play caller or a coach is just to not get your talent on the field. Yeah. Because that's the number one driver over your X's and O's and all the things you may think you know. Best players on the field, still the most important thing, and then adapting to their qualities. So last year, when you've got Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and JSN, and you come out here and you're like, no, we're still going to run 2 tight end sets. Yeah, no, you should be 80% immediately out the gate. You should be, you came from the McVay tree. You actually have seen this before. You've witnessed it. Now, the one pass we can maybe give Waldron, dude, is the fact that he was under Pete Carroll. Pete could have been the dude saying, no, we're still going to run. We're still going to do the Noah Fant, Colby Parkinson, Will Disley thing. We're going to do that because Pete's an old school dude. He likes that heavy personnel. And he won a lot of games using that style of football back in the day with Russ before what? The defense has changed.
Yes.
I don't think rabbit trail real quick. I don't think I've ever seen a player so impacted by the way defenses have changed so quickly than Russell Wilson. Because Russ's money ball was, we're going to suck you in and I'm going to drop a dime you've never seen. The pass is actually going to leave your TV screen like a punt. Yep. And you're going to think I suck. And then it's going to drop right in the basket for my wide receiver, Tyler Lockett, who's like 5'1", and your DB is 6'2", and it ain't going to matter. It's still going to be right there. So, but back to Waldron. So not using the personnel. We're talking about a guy that used play action pass 10% of the time. That's play action pass is divided by drop backs, guys. Okay. So that means your intention was to drop back and throw. You might've got sacked. You might've scrambled. But 10%, the league average is 15%. You're not even the league average?
Yeah.
That's worth 25% more for your wide receivers. I know you're talking about fantasy. It doesn't matter. Yards. Everybody wants yards. Coordinators want yards. Fantasy players want yards. We want yards. Okay? Worth 25% more. Motion? Oh, forget about it. 34%. The league average is 56%. What are we doing? Are we actually trying to make our offense dysfunctional? Do you go into your quarterback meeting and go, Gino, this week, you're going to play with one hand tied behind your back because we want to see that. That's our plan for the week. That's what this dude has done.
Yeah.
He's also an offense that honestly, I don't think he's a very good sequencer of the way he sets up his plays. They really struggle to get first downs. They struggle at time of possession. Why? Because they can't get first downs. Why should an offense with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Charbonnet, Kenneth Walker, how are you struggling to get first downs? I know the offensive line wasn't great, but coordinators can offset bad offensive line play to some extent. You go to more quick passing, you dial up schemes, you use things to create confusion with the defense right before the snap, ways to get guys open quickly and cleanly off the line. So I put that in your lap. Everything's not going to be perfect in every offense. Every offense is going to, for the most part, not all, there are a few perfection examples, but for the most part, every offense has some deficiency. And to me, a coordinator has to overcome that. And so Shane Waldron, in my opinion, has done absolutely nothing. And then on top of that, to just make JSN go out there and run drag routes. I mean, this dude was a monster creating vertical issues for linebackers and safeties in college. I know his ADOT wasn't like a 15 in college, but 9, 10, and he came up consistently with big plays. And you saw it in the preseason with Drew Lock. Right away, that dime against the Cowboys down the field between him and JSN when JSN hurt his wrist. Maybe that was a factor. But JSN was interviewed about this. Remember this? I don't remember if you saw that.
I did see
when he was asked about Shade Waldron. I mean, he basically pled the fifth. But he rolled his eyes. His body language said everything.
Yeah, it said everything that you needed to know. But Dwain, a lot of people in the fantasy space doesn't matter. Not only does Shane Waldron doesn't matter that it's a rookie quarterback. Odunze is going to come out there and lead the team and everything out the gate. It's that I call it that hopium. It's literally magic.
I think Odunze, I like him right now, basically because he's the cheapest of the three guys, right? Mm-hmm. Keenan Allen is at a spot where age become a factor. The big thing I want to know there, Ray, is in training camp, I'm going to be watching for who's playing in the 2 wide receiver sets.
Yes.
Because we just talked about all this mess with Shane Waldron. I don't trust him to run 11 personnel. I think there's a chance that's Odunze and DJ Moore. And so that's going to kind of tilt me one way or the other. The thing I'll say about Odunze is, let's say the Bears do stink. By the time you're at the end of your year and you're trying to win your fantasy championship, I think there's a really good chance that it is the Odunze and DJ Moore show. That's where I get and so I draft him a lot in best ball because of that. I agree with you that if you're playing in a redraft league, if you draft Odunze, and I still do think he's a good target in those, but you can't be slotting him in as your wide receiver 3 week 1. You may have to draft him as your wide receiver 3 and say, I'm going to be patient with this dude, but turn around quickly and draft Deontay Johnson as your wide receiver 4, who's really going to be the guy you're going to start in week 1 at wide receiver 3. And then you're going to make Odunze earn his way into your lineup, and you're just betting on his talent. But you have to build your roster in a way that allows you to not have to depend on Odunze week 1.
It's your expectation. It's your level. You can draft Odunze with confidence at cost and feel good about it when your roster construction is right. Yes, when you understand that I'm not banking on this guy to come in week 1.
Think of it as like the same thing as drafting Rashee Rice, basically, right now.
There it is. There it is. And that's what it is. Let me ask you, you continue to use this T word all show. Talent, talent, talent. Mm-hmm. Normally, and how it should go, and historically, the more talented players are drafted earlier. Simple concept. Yet, over the past couple of years, Dwain, I'm looking at the profiles of some of these receivers that are drafted later in round 1 of the NFL draft. And I'm looking at the Legettes, I'm looking at the Pearsalls, and I'm just thinking about everything that I've learned and we've studied through fantasy, the NFL lens, listening around. And I'm like, these aren't players who historically profile like first-round wide receivers. They're not. So my thinking goes to this, Dwain, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, but here's what I start to think. We spent this entire show talking about different changes the defenses are deploying, quarterback situations, schemes. Do you believe there are some NFL teams who are drafting these players to fit a specific role? I didn't draft Pearsall to be my number 1. I just need him to do those 6 things. And where we lean on capital, because it is a good predictor, how do you assess those situations where the draft capital is saying that's the talent? Pearsall and Legette, that's the talent. But then you look at what Canales did in Tampa Bay, and you start to reasonably think, okay, where does Legette go? Like he's not getting fed over Deontay. Adam Thielen is, I know he's old, but he's going to be on the field. He'll be out there on the field. And then the big X factor, the quarterback, I don't know if Bryce is really good or not. When you've got the things that are saying this is the talented player, but all the other peripheral information is saying, I don't know, man. I don't know if Pearsall's drafted to be the one for Brock Purdy down the line. How do you delineate talent and draft capital?
Yeah, I think it can be tricky at times. And so I'll say a couple of quick things here. And first part, I'm just going to go nerdy for just a second. So you guys don't tune out. I promise I'll just keep it, high level. And look, like you said, Ray, we have a really educated crowd here, so maybe I should just go complete nerd, but I just don't want to go long is what I'm saying. Right, so 2 things here. There's linear thought process, right? Which means you've basically got a straight line diagonally down based on you were picked first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth in the NFL draft. But the real way that draft capital works is it's called logarithmic, meaning it's a curve. You have high probabilities of hitting, and then it goes drastically down. And really, by the end of round 2, it's almost a straight drop down to the bottom of round 2. And then essentially it flattens off in the 3rd round down to the 7th round. It still keeps going down, but it's flat. So the difference in a pick 8 versus where Leggett went in the 1st round is actually huge in terms of what real draft capital means. And the way that I did this is I used the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, actually an updated version from a guy named Chase Stewart, who basically refitted it for the current NFL. And I applied that to all the prospects in my prospect model. And so what happens is these guys that are going in the late 1st round, they don't get overweighted. So that's one way process-wise to handle it.
Nice.
The other thing, though, and why that starts to become a thing, one is talent. Talent drops off. But I think that also coaching staffs, and this dovetails into the other question you asked, I think they jump into this scouting process late, and certain names in certain rooms, we know who most of them are, they take over when maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they should be like, here are the things I need in a player, but I still really, you've been studying these guys all year long. Okay. And I hired you to be in this role. So either I don't think you're good at it, which means I should fire you and find someone I do think is good at it, or I'm just an egomaniac. Okay. Now, coaches have to have an ego. We know this. You're dealing with players. They have egos. You've got to have this balance to lead a team. But what happens, Kyle Shanahan's he's historically known for this. Stepping in and taking over and overcoming like John Lynch. And that's what happened with Pearsall. And I do think he does what you said. I think he comes in and he says, this is my scheme. And he's been successful with it, guys. Deebo Samuel is a very talented player, but Kyle Shanahan's scheme adds to Deebo Samuel. Believe me, it does. There are other coordinators that would have gotten Deebo and not known to use him the way Kyle does. Okay? So the other thing is you have Brandon Ayuk on the backside of the place daring you to run man coverage. Run man. Run man coverage to stop Deebo with your zone over there. Deebo, he gets all the targets against zone. But if you go man, you're basically saying we're taking away the screenplay. We're going to be like all over it, right? Yep. And so it's when you do that, you're going to Ayuk. But the point being, like, I do think that certain coaches do that. And the closer you get to the end of the 1st round, the more likely they actually are to say, we want to go get scheme, when I think that can be a hole. And that's where you do need like your scouting department and your analytics department to be strong and step up and say, hey, we feel you, but overall, we still think the best wide receiver, if we want one here long-term for the 49ers, is not Ricky Pearsall. And this is not shit on Ricky Pearsall.
No.
Pearsall has some really talented things about him, but he did not grade that great in the Supermodel, the wide receiver Supermodel over at fantasylife.com. Everybody can check it out over there for free. He didn't grade out that well, and I thought he was a reach. I thought Leggett was a reach. That doesn't mean these guys can't be good, but at the end of the 1st round, I still have an expectation of what I want out of those picks, even though it's dropped from the early picks. Those were still, in my opinion, reaches. But another reason I do believe that draft capital falls off the way it is, not just because of the talent. It is because you get more noise at the bottom of the round of people doing these things you're talking about. They start thinking, oh, well, I know better. I'm just going to take this guy. You don't get that as much up at the top of the draft. Occasionally you get a Michael Penix. Like, it happens. Right. But it's much more rare. And even you'll notice the guys commentating the draft, when those kind of picks happen at the end of the 1st round, they're not as shocked by it. They're just like, oh, he's a fit for the team. It's just what you said. You hear that all the time. Well, he fits what they do. When really you should still be on this relentless path of we want the best player that gives us the most outs, meaning they might be able to play all sorts of roles. Because what if Brandon Ayuk goes down? Knock on wood, we don't want it. What if he goes down this year? Is Ricky Pearsall going to be the answer? I don't know. I mean, maybe he is. Maybe Kyle Shanahan sees something we don't, but I'm skeptical.
Well, Dwain, we've talked a lot about things that have happened historically. Trends.
I can talk about this stuff all day, man. Sorry.
I can too. And I'm sure there are a lot of people watching or listening that would love to hear us talk about this all day. But I want to end with this. I want to wrap with this because I thought about asking the question to you, but I know the answer is we are. And what I'm going to say is I believe that this line and level of thinking about these players and the situations and the quarterbacks and the coordinators and the schemes and the deployment, motion, 3 wide receiver sets, slot target rate, certain routes that yield more fantasy points than others. I believe, Dwain, that this is the next iteration of what data analysis for fantasy football is going to look like down the line. And I know that you're working on a ton of things with Fantasy Life. We're doing a lot of stuff at DD Fantasy Football to try to create these micro edges about the game to help us be better in fantasy football. So before I get you out of here, I want you to really quickly talk about the Supermodel, because a lot of people seem to struggle with prospect analysis today. I don't know if it's the college game is doing some different stuff, or it's just it's a little more difficult. You're getting 1-year players like Anthony Richardson, who didn't do anything in college, get drafted high. You've got, I think people are just struggling with identifying collegiate level talent to the NFL. So quickly, talk about that Supermodel.
Yeah, so the rookie Supermodel is just what you mentioned. It's essentially just designed to look at the factors, the data points that have been the most predictive to future success in the NFL. And I call those fantasy points. Again, we all want targets. We all want catches. We all want yards. We want touchdowns. Well, you got to be good players to do that. And here's what I'll say. The biggest factor with the Supermodel is if you're going to do college kind of work, I believe the number one thing you have to do is you have to calibrate and you have to adjust for the different environments these guys are coming from, because it is so it's so wide. We think it's wide in the NFL, worst place to first, and in college it's like so much more. Yes. Right? So not all offenses are created equal. Most college teams don't have a good quarterback by NFL standards. So if you've got a wide receiver that plays with a bad quarterback, in the Supermodel, what it does, it adjusts. So their yards per route run get an adjustment based on the quarterback they played with, based on historical data. So there's a yards per route run over or under expected based on the quality of their quarterback play for every game they played in college. Okay. So we're adjusting for that. Also, like, you can't just go look at yards. Most people understand this now, but I mean, if you play on a team like, Jim Harbaugh ran, Jim Harbaugh dropped back to pass the ball 46% of the time at Stanford when he had Andrew freaking Luck. I mean, the dude's going to run the ball. He don't care. He doesn't care. Like, if you're Jesus Christ, he's running. Right. He's running the ball. So you have to account for things like that. And so yards per team pass attempt, for example, matters a lot. You got to adjust for how often the team is passing, and then you got to adjust for the quality of the quarterback play. So the Supermodel is really designed to adjust for the things that matter the most. And a lot of them we've talked about that also matter a lot in the NFL. Surprise. A lot of those same things matter in college. So that's what it's really all about. It obviously takes age into play. Guys that break out earlier, that does matter, but it's not a complete death knell if you break out late, depending on what your situation may have looked like the first 3 years of your career. If you didn't break out until you were a senior, maybe there were some factors that held you back. So that's what it's about. It's about trying to calibrate all those things. It's something that I work on every offseason, try to make it better. Typically February, I spent about a month of just hardcore doing research, digging into any new data points that may have come out in the marketplace, anything like that, to see, hey, is there something here? Is there something that can make this thing better? I'll say 95% of my time is I chase down things that I'll get to the end and be like, well, that was interesting, but it doesn't matter. It's not going to go into the model. But, you have to do it, because you occasionally get those golden nuggets where you're like, whoa, how have we not seen this before? How have we not figured this out before? So folks can go check it out. Each position has different criteria. And so nice. I'm only going to give you the things that matter the most. And I'm going to avoid, just giving you data points just to give you data points.
Thank you for that. And make sure y'all check that out. That will be linked in the description to this video. Dwain, I am going to leave you with this and some things to think about as we move forward. All these great receivers, quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, 2020, 49.6 points per game across the NFL. Down 43.5 this year. That 6.1 point difference from 2020 to 2023, that drop in scoring across the NFL, the largest ever over a 4-year time span. This article that I'm going to link talks about a couple of different things, Dwain. Third and long conversion rates that you talked about, down across the NFL. Defenses, too high. Zone coverages 70% of the time, limiting offenses. And then they also talk about the home and away scoring from the outlier 2020 season where all those points were scored. It's identical. There was no advantage, home field or away.
Did they happen just real quick, Ray, to talk about all the quarterback injuries the last 2 years? I definitely think that's a factor. Quarterback play is down the last 2 years because of injuries.
And my question to you, and this is the final thing, and I don't want you to go in depth with this because I don't know if you've studied this or not, and we actually don't even have the information, so we can't even have this conversation until next year. But with these rule changes in the NFL, especially with the kick return rule and where players are going to starting field position, do you think that's going to impact scoring opportunities? I read an article, Dwain, about where the average starting field position is, these new rules scooting the average starting line of scrimmage field position up further, making it closer to effectively convert a field goal opposed to a touchdown. But NFL wants points.
Yep.
I just think that we're going to start to see some changes in trend and data over the next couple of years that are reflective of what's happening like now, 2021, 2022. It's going to take some time. But if you looked at any of the new rule changes with the kickoff rule and the kick return rule, starting field position impacting fantasy scoring at all?
Well, we know that starting field position will matter because we've seen that in expected points added, and EPA per play. So essentially all EPA is going back and looking at play-by-play data for some set of parameters that you've given it, whether it's 10 years, 20 years, whatever the case may be. And it'll essentially tell you when a team has a first down and 10 to go from their own 34, this is how many points they score on average. Well, it's higher than it is at 33. It's higher than it is at the 32-yard line. It's higher than it is at the 30. So the better field position is all about the NFL wanting points. It's funny, the NFL was all about safety for about 2 years. And then the points went down. They were like, well, actually, we're still about points. We're going to bring the and they do it in the name of, we just thought we lost kind of, an important part of the game. Whatever. You want points. You want ratings. We understand. Just call it what it is. But don't sit here and act like we're stupid. We know what you're doing. Okay? So just come out straight with it. So, yeah, it's going to matter. And I will say the other thing that happens in these 3 and 4 year stretches, I think things will level back out because offenses they're in the process of doing it. We talked about some of the new cheat codes. They're going to continue to find the counterpunches to what defenses are doing. And eventually this coverage we're talking about today that is so deadly, it'll become the gene code genes. It'll become the old thing again. And there'll be a new phase that comes in. There'll be components of it that will always last. Right. And that will always make defenses better. But the offenses, they're not stupid. They're going to adapt their personnel. They're going to adapt their scheme and they're going to make the defense change. OK. The other thing that I would say with it is the quarterback injury stuff. And we have a lot of young quarterbacks that were still coming into their own. You also lost Tom Brady. You lost Drew Brees. So there's these little things. The context matters. There's these little things that are going on that I think it's probably not as bad as what we think that it is. But I do think that the kickoff return rule is a knee-jerk reaction by the NFL to help try to fix it more quickly. I will say that.
Dwain, thank you for your time. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for the information, my friend. Everybody that's listening or watching, if you're not following Dwain, do that. Check out all of his work and the great things that are happening over at Fantasy Life. Appreciate you, Dwain.
Appreciate you, Ray. Thanks for having me.
Thank y'all for checking out this episode over here on the channel. Again, if you appreciated that, if you liked it, if it was entertaining and or actionable, subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up button, like the content. And if you do enjoy this type of depth and analysis about the game and the wide receiver position, I highly encourage you to check out the Trinity video that I put out the other day on the channel, going through the Green Bay Packers wide receiver room, using a proprietary score that we created that encompasses a lot of the things that we just discussed in this video. Make sure you're following Dwain at Dwain McFarland on X and check out all of the work that he does. Y'all have a good one. Until next time, we out of this thing. Peace. Okay, let's get it.